Before the interview starts, I want to say hello to all the metal, crossover and hardcore fans out there. I thank you all for watching. My guest has been in the music business for about 40 years. He has released records that today are seen as classics. He is the captain of my absolute favorite band. He is the captain of the mighty Propane. Here is Gary Meskil. Welcome, Gary.
Hello, Matt. It's good to see you once again.
Good to see you once again. It's always a pleasure.
Never in person, but always virtually. That's the beauty of the internet. So how's it going?
It's going good. Life is good in Sweden. We have nice weather. It's in the middle of the summer, and we're all happy. What's life in Florida? Life like in Florida?
Pretty good. My wife was up pretty early. She was watching the U.S. versus Sweden women's football game this morning.
Sweden won.
Yeah. While I was sleeping, of course.
I think before we go into Propane and all the questions I have about that, I want to go back to 1986 and maybe earlier, in the early 80s, when you before you formed Crumbsuckers. What was life like then? How old were you at the time? And give us some background.
Prior to starting the band, I got really introduced to punk and hardcore music, sort of haphazardly over the radio. There was a radio show from WNYU in New York City called Noise the Show, and the DJ was a guy by the name of Tim Summers. Not 100% sure, but he really introduced a lot of people like myself to this form of music, which was really brand new to me at the time. And it really had everything that I was looking for at that time of my life in terms of really new and exciting music. Up till that time, I was listening to more classic rock stuff, like Led Zeppelin and Kiss and Kansas and Styx and, really great bands. But when I discovered punk and hardcore, it was something really exciting to me. And maybe it had a lot to do with, my adolescence at the time and just the energy of the music, and the message was really important as well. And so I was immediately drawn to it, and I started, getting some friends together and going to concerts in New York City. There was no scene on Long Island at that time, so it was like pre-Long Island hardcore.
And what year?
And that came a little bit later.
Is this 81 or around 1980?
Yeah, it was around 1980. I think exactly 1980, because I don't recall stumbling upon this kind of music earlier than that. Even though there were some bands that were around, like the Bad Brains, started in the late 70s. But I started listening to this kind of music in 1980, and I think the first club shows that I started attending were probably in either late 1980 or 1981. And then I eventually picked up the bass. A close friend of mine was playing bass guitar, and he was teaching himself how to play all these different songs, and more in the style of like new wave music, like the Cars and, Squeeze and Joe Jackson and stuff. And I thought that was cool. And so I went and picked up a bass myself, and I started to teach myself a lot of different songs. And eventually that led to me wanting to start a band when I was still in high school, and during one of our summer vacations, when we were trying to figure out what to do with our time, our free time. And so I called up a few friends whom I knew played instruments, and and we formed what later became Crumbsuckers, and it started off as a cover band. So we were playing stuff like UK Subs and really early Misfits stuff. And we got to the point where we were playing the cover songs pretty well, and we wanted to kind of venture into creating our own music. And it didn't take so long. I think probably 6 to 8 months into being a cover band, we started to write our first songs. And some of those songs, some of the really early songs made it onto Life of Dreams, like Just Sit There was one of the real original Crumbsuckers songs. We went through a lot of set lists and a lot of progression even before Life of Dreams came out. So Life of Dreams was actually a greatest hits album of the real early years.
Yeah, I read that the first song you ever wrote was Just Sit There.
Yeah.
That's a pretty cool first song to write. Classic.
Yeah. And I mean, a lot of people still enjoy listening to Life of Dreams and that song. And it was pretty cool to see, bands like Mr. Bungle come out and cover Just Sit There. And really brought back a lot of great memories for me, and we were certainly proud to see some guys that have really taken this kind of music to new heights have such an admiration for my old band and the songs that we created together.
What was it like when you before you released the album? You toured, you played CBGBs, and you played different clubs. And can you tell us about how that progressed?
Well, I don't recall the very first club that we played in New York City. It might have been at A7, and we got to be pretty close with some of the bands that were playing in that very early scene at that time, like Agnostic Front and Cause for Alarm and Murphy's Law, and so. We were like, we were part of the scene, but not as a band just yet. We were going to shows. And when we finally had this group that had a set list of original songs, we were looking to sort of broaden our horizons and play on some stages. And I think it was probably A7, the first New York City club that we played. And we were all real young, back then. But the scene was really young too. So a lot of these other bands that I just spoke of were, pretty much in the same age group, give or take a few years. The
hardcore scene started with Bad Brains. Is that fair to say that in 79, 80, somewhere around that?
Yeah, I think they released the Pay to Come single in maybe 77 or 78. Something like that. So, and that really blew the doors off of a lot of things at that time. I mean, they were real super cutting edge, and what a sight to see, going to a Bad Brain show back in the early 80s. I mean, the electricity was in the air, and you didn't really know what to expect, whether they were going to deliver the hardest hardcore songs or maybe even just one and have a set that was like 95% reggae.
Yeah. You never knew.
You never knew what they were going to deliver, but you knew that it was going to be good.
I read that Roger from Agnostic Front booked your first show at CBGB. Is that correct?
Yeah, he helped us secure our very first gig at CBGB's, and that was in support of HR from the Bad Brains. He had a solo project called HR and Company, and I think we were the sole support on that day. And we had a ton of friends come in from Long Island, and they kind of stirred the place up, and we really made a mark for ourselves. And so the scene started to talk about us, and we were like these outcasts from Long Island that came in and just, stirred up the whole New York City scene. And then it just kind of took on its own life from there. We started playing more shows, and more people started to get into us. And as things progressed, more metalheads started to really appreciate our band because we had some metal stylings to offer the public, more so than a lot of the more purist hardcore bands and punk bands were delivering at that time. So it was something really new, and so people thought that was perhaps something that they should be getting into.
Yeah, I know that Scott Ian and Kirk Hammett were Crumbsuckers fans.
Yeah, I think that was a good introduction into hardcore punk for guys like that, because they had more of a metal background, and we had things to offer them, in terms of really good soloing and some metal grooves, if you will. And then they started to get into the more purist kind of hardcore punk, and so I think that's where sort of that whole crossover thing came from. And there were other bands doing not the same, but having some crossover stylings at the same time. So you had bands like Corrosion of Conformity, and Excel, and Dead Brain Cells from Canada. There was a lot of bands that were sort of incorporating metal into their hardcore punk music and creating a new style, which eventually became called crossover. And I think that was sort of what the magazines and the rock press called it.
What do you think about that title? Do you think that's fair enough to say that you were a crossover band, or do you see yourself as a hardcore band?
I always saw us as a hardcore band, although I can certainly understand where the subgenre comes from. But I'm not such a big fan of that everything has to be a subgenre, because it kind of it's division. It takes an already smaller type of music and just divides it and dices it up, and so people say, "Oh, I'm into this particular subgenre, but not that." And I don't think it serves the broader scene very well. When we came out for the first years, we were just a hardcore band, despite the fact that we had a lot of metal in our sound. And it wasn't until the record companies wanted to sell albums and the magazines wanted to sell magazines that we were called a crossover band. After they do that, and it's sort of a stamp that never goes away.
I remember when I was young or younger, and I listened to Crumbsuckers, I listened to Cro-Mags and Youth of Today, DRI, there's a lot of different bands. And I remember that back then it was the attitude and the energy that I really connected with. Today, when I listen to Life of Dreams, I can hear it's a pretty complex song structure, and it's in a way very different from the, let's say, Cro-Mags style, but the attitude was the same in a way.
Yeah, we had an aggressive delivery in the vocals and the music. The arrangements were really unique because we were really new to the game, so it just kind of happened, and we were not experienced songwriters at the time, and so we were just taking things and riffs that wouldn't ordinarily go together, and we just made them work. And so we sort of created our own style out of pure ignorance.
What a great result. And the cover from Sean Taggart is absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, that really set everything in stone for us. And I remember him bringing the artwork over to CBGB's, out in the front where everybody kind of congregated. And, he sort of unveiled his idea for the cover. I think it underwent a couple of changes, since the original draft. But we knew that right away that, okay, that's definitely something cool, because he's, not only creating a fine piece of art for the band, but he's creating these characters that, will be great for merchandise and everything else. And, that was a real home run for us. And I think it's one of the reasons that the album has lived on through the ages, because it just has this iconic cover art to go along with a really special kind of music that very few bands were trying to do at that time.
Yeah, the album has really stood the test of time. It's 35 years ago, and it's seen as a classic album, so that's very cool.
Right. Thank you.
The clubs you speak about, A7 and then CBGBs, and then there was L'Amour, and there was a lot of different clubs. And from what I understand, they have different styles depending on which club you choose to go to. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, CBGBs was more of a place where the punk rockers and the hardcore kids would go. A little bit later in the game, like maybe by the mid '80s, the shows were attracting a lot of metalheads. And L'Amour's was sort of happening in reverse, in that it started as primarily a metal club. And as the years went on, it was getting a little bit more and more infiltrated by punk rockers and hardcore kids. So it was just the same things were happening, but just in the reverse. And both iconic clubs of their time. And I know that in more recent times, I think L'Amour's was or is trying to make a resurgence, and that's really cool. It was very sad to see CBGBs go, several years back, and they'll never be in another place like that. That's for sure.
All the interviews that I hear and listen to, they talk about CBGBs in a very special way. That it seems to be something about that place that was totally unique.
Yeah, like when you entered the club, you immediately smelled the clove cigarettes, and it wasn't such an inviting place. I mean, it was a dive, yeah. But it had this really great PA, so despite its sort of ugly surroundings, you would really get really a great sound, off of that stage and from the PA system. And there was a lot of really classic sort of off the board recordings that were done in that place. And there was no shortage of really good soundmen at that location at that time. I think Tommy Victor from Prong was one of the earlier soundmen at CBGB's, and he mixed us a bunch of times.
Do you have those recordings still, or are they lost?
One of the demos that we did at CBGB's made its way onto a recent release, and by recent I mean probably about 3 years ago. It was called Turn Back Time: The Early Years, and it was released on vinyl, but I think it came with a free CD. And it has a lot of the early like basement recordings and earlier versions of Crumbsuckers songs. I was sent a complimentary copy from Dave Brady, one of our old singers, prior to Chris Notaro, and I listened to the CD. I don't have a turntable anymore, unfortunately, so I couldn't play the wax, but it's pretty cool. I mean, it's from a historical point of view, it's a really cool thing, and it really archived the early years of the Crumbsuckers very well. Is it for somebody that's looking for really great cutting edge sound quality? Absolutely not. You're really going to get, the raw deal and, audio, but it's cool. And when you listen to that, everything sort of makes sense in terms of going from there to Life of Dreams and then to Beast on My Back.
So let's go to Beast on My Back. I actually have that on vinyl as well.
Okay.
So pretty cool. You released that in 1988. It's called Beast on My Back, or BOMB.
Yep.
Can you tell us a bit about that album? Because that had a different sound from Life of Dreams, and I know that you went through some lineup changes, and it happened a lot of stuff between the first album and the second album. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, after Life of Dreams was released, we started to go a little bit more in like a thrash metal direction, if you will. So we were listening to Metallica a lot, and I think that was at the time of Ride the Lightning, and the earliest Megadeth stuff, and Exodus, first two records. So we were starting to get really influenced by early thrash, and we wanted to incorporate some of that into our own sound. So it was a bit of a natural progression, as much as it was methodical, you know. The guitarist in particular wanted to go in a more of a thrash direction, and I guess so that they can stretch their skills a little bit more. And you know, Danny and I were always trying to kind of keep things, you know, things anchored in terms of where our roots were. And so by the time Beast on My Back came out, you know, we had, you know, 9 songs that were much longer, that delved into areas of music that we didn't go into on Life of Dreams. We had this really cool guitar piece that eventually became a piano piece, you know, for Breakout. Oh. And that really shook the audience to its core, because, you know, we just came off of Life of Dreams, and I think that people were expecting, you know, if not a Life of Dreams Part 2, something similar. And then they hear this really beautiful classical piano piece opening up. They probably had to check to see if they got the right album.
Yeah, probably, yeah.
And then it went into Breakout, and you know, there were some songs like Breakout minus the piano piece and the song Beast on My Back, that if the production was a little bit dirtier, these could have been on Life of Dreams, you know. Not all of the songs, but there were some that could have been featured on Life of Dreams.
I think Breakout has the same energy as the songs on Life of Dreams. I think it's a great song, and I love the piano piece, and I know it was performed on guitar live.
Yeah, that's how it was written. It was, Chuck Lenahan's cousin is a great piano player, and he was just sort of messing around with the track one time, and while Chuck was playing the track on guitar, and he just figured everything out on piano, and we thought that would be kind of cool to do in the studio.
So looking back to the 2 Crumbsuckers album, which one would you say is your personal favorite?
Life of Dreams is my personal favorite. And I think it's because everything for me in retrospect really comes together, you know, in terms of the production, the longevity of the style that we were doing. Beast on My Back is something that if I had to re-record it, I would dirty it up a little bit in terms of production. Some of the tones for me are a little bit too sterile and clean, you know, and particularly like the guitar tones, which it was cool, really cool at that time. But, you know, here we are so many years later, where when I listen to it, I want to hear it a little bit more gritty. And maybe that's just a personal thing. I'm not really sure, but maybe some people can follow me on that. You know, Life of Dreams. With Life of Dreams, I wouldn't change a thing. You know, with Beast on My Back, I would certainly dirty the guitars up a little bit. Not have so much reverb on the drums. I think it was something that was done a lot in the 80s, you know, with the big lots of reverb on every piece of the drum kit. There was never enough, I mean, listen to like Def Leppard, bands like that, the snare drum just goes on forever. But if you have so much reverb on a snare drum, I think it sounds terrible when you're playing faster music, because it just creates a drone. So with faster music, I think a tighter drum sound is more conducive and complements the overall sound better.
So any chance of a remastered version of Beast on My Back, maybe? Is that possible?
I think anything's possible. It would have to be a labor of love, because, for people to do it for financial gain, it wouldn't be worth it. And it would have to take a fair amount of permission from other companies, because Sony actually financed the record. So they own the product, Sony Relativity. So there would have to be some permission involved. Perhaps it wouldn't take too much begging and pleading, but I don't think anybody's really gone up that road yet. Maybe it's something worthwhile doing in the future,
It's two great records, and it's nice music history that you've been a part of, definitely. And I know you still have a lot of Crumbsuckers fans out there that they are divided in which album they prefer, but it's got a lot of love from fans. I know that.
Yeah, and that's great. It just lives on, and it's really nice to see. And I really wonder, if I were to take on such a project like we just discussed, and if I would tweak things to my liking, if people would really get it, if the fans would really grasp it, because in the end, it sort of is what it is, And
exactly.
When you take that and change it, it just doesn't feel right to a lot of people.
No, that's right. Respect what's done, and be grateful for that.
It's something I always tell the guys in the studio, and you sort of reach conclusions by making a lot of mistakes, and in the studio, we always used to kind of want to achieve something that was so difficult to get, and we would eventually just chase our tails, and we'd have to start from scratch again. Okay, let's just re-record all of the guitars, instead of just leaving it alone, having it just be a time capsule. Okay, this is us at this time. Let's just do our best, and we'll just whatever we come out with is that time capsule. It took us a lot of years and a lot of records to sort of reach that conclusion. And let's just go with it and have it be a place in time, and that record is its own thing.
And I guess when you're a musician and you're in the studio, you can always tweak something. You can always, you got 1,000 possibilities, and in the end, you have to stop somewhere, I guess. Otherwise, you will never be a finished product.
Yeah, that's true. I think that sort of mentality lends itself to the broader genre, and that everyone, after all of this big, perfect production, where do you go from there? And everything's so perfect, right? It's like, all the drums are sampled, and everybody's striving for the same perfect production. Then it gets boring. So then you eventually, as of a few years ago, you had bands starting to go back to the roots and making and producing their records, taking a more minimalist approach, which I think was pretty cool. So you had bands coming out with albums that had more of a demo quality sound, and I thought that was interesting. A good starting point again.
Yeah, recorded live more or less, in a way. Yeah.
Right.
And after what happened after Beast on My Back was released, you did a European tour. Is that correct? And you toured the States with the album?
Well, the band was sort of in the process of being drawn and quartered by itself, because not everyone, but there were certain factions within the band that wanted to go in different directions from other factions in the band. And it sort of pulled the band apart. I think Chris Notaro, the vocalist, sort of felt isolated at that time, and he decided that he wanted to bow out. And we already had some touring plans lined up in terms of going to Europe for the first time, and we figured, let's try a new vocalist and see where it goes. And we'll go to Europe. If it goes well, maybe we'll continue as a band. If not, maybe we'll consider disbanding afterwards. And after the tour, and after a while of pondering that, we decided to split up not too long afterwards.
So you never toured, did you tour Europe?
We had, it wasn't a big tour. We had a handful of shows supporting Onslaught, a really great band from the UK. And that's when Steve Grimmett from Grim Reaper was singing at the time. Yeah. And what a vocalist. Wow. And really nice guys. So it was a really fun tour. And we also had some headlining shows in the Netherlands and in Belgium.
So then you went back to States, and you just decided to, okay, let's leave this and split up more or less.
Yeah, and it's really a crazy set of circumstances before we came home, because we were supposed to only play the shows with Onslaught, and in the middle of the tour, we got an offer to play some headline shows, and this was around Christmas time in 1988. And so we thought about it. We discussed it. We said, yeah, we're here. We might as well just, stay. We'll play a few extra shows. And it's really, it was a life-saving moment that we decided to do these shows, because we were booked on TWA Flight 800 to go home, which was bombed. And I remember our families going crazy, like, where, what's going on with the guys? I think our last show with Onslaught was in Scotland, and I think that's where the flight kind of flew out of. And we were already in the Netherlands at that time. I think on Christmas Day we played in Belgium, and it was just fate. Shortly after we came home, we collectively decided that it's just not really happening, and if we want to continue going in a certain direction, we should probably lose the name Crumbsuckers and do something else for the fans. We don't want to drag our fans through something that is completely different from where we started, and it's just not worth torturing the fans over.
But you have played 3 reunion shows with Crumbsuckers, one in 1990 at Sundance, one in 2006 at BB King, and one in 2015 at Black and Blue Bowl. What's your memories of those reunions?
I was totally satisfied with 2 out of the 3. I think the first 2 reunion shows were great. I thought we really represented the music really well, and the last reunion, I think it's great for fans that have never seen the band before, and they got a chance to see the band one time, or for other fans, one last time. But on stage, I just didn't feel like we were delivering the goods like we did in the past. And if you get that feeling, as somebody that's on stage, it probably should be the last time. And that's what we all thought in the end. We got the offer from Freddie from Madball, and he's very instrumental in putting those Black and Blue festivals together. And he was gracious enough to give us a good offer to get the band back together. I told him, I said, man, this is going to be it's going to be really difficult to do this, man. I said, I'll try, because I'm not going to be the one against it. If everyone else wants to do it, I'll do it. And it's easier for me than some of the other guys, because I'm still playing music where some of the others aren't. I think it's much more difficult for them to kind of jump back in the game and live up to people's expectations. That's really, really hard if you haven't been doing it for years. And so eventually we got the go ahead from all the guys, and then soon after, some of those guys started to fall by the wayside and said, I don't want to do this thing. And then I had to try my best to reel them back in. And this happened several times. So it was really, really hard to put it all together. And, we did it. We're glad that it happened. But I don't think anybody can expect or should expect us to come back and do it again.
Now it sounds like that it was the last Crumbsuckers show.
That was the final, yes.
Yeah. And then you and Danny, you progressed and formed Heavy Rain. From the original, or from the members from Beast on My Back album.
Yeah, the guys that wanted to stay together did so by changing the name to Heavy Rain. And we continued in a more commercial way, I guess you could say. Commercial hard rock, with melodic vocals. And the music was really interesting. It was a little reminiscent of the Crumbsuckers because the arrangements were kind of unique and strange and kind of cool at the time. The songs were fairly long, 5-6 minutes apiece on average, and nothing that the majority of Crumbsuckers fans could really sink their teeth into. A lot of the fans that kind of crossed over from Crumbsuckers into Heavy Rain were more of the fans that really appreciated Beast on My Back. But by the time Heavy Rain came around, I don't think there were many of the real core supporters that were left. And we gave it our best shot with that band. It was short-lived because our guitarist Mark Piavanetti, who a lot of people know from his early days and being in a band called Carnivore, he was in the later years. He was with Crumbsuckers and also came along with us in the Heavy Rain group. And right when things were really getting going for us in terms of label interest, big publishing company interest, he decided to leave the band. And this is when we already had bona fide contracts in our hand and everything else. And it was a death blow to the band. What do we do from here? He wrote half the songs. So,
did he ever explain why he did that, or an idea what happened?
He cited personal reasons. We asked him if we could, continue to use the material that he wrote and just give him credit for it. And, if there was eventual income, he would get his, share of the royalties from it. And he didn't want us to do that. So, and we said, okay, fair enough. We'll respect your wishes, of course. And then we were faced with a bit of a dilemma. Like, do we continue this and get rid of all those songs and write a bunch of new songs, go back to the drawing board, get a new guitar player. And Danny and I were really speaking about the next steps and what to do. And we decided to leave that project where it was and go back into something that was more familiar to us, and to something where our roots were in heavy music. And that's when we started Propane. It was just Danny and I that started Propane together, in the old Crumbsuckers rehearsal room, which was at my parents' house in the downstairs porch. Yeah, and we wrote the first 3 songs almost instantaneously. I think it was Rawhead, Death Goes On, God Only Knows. And then Arachnophobia. So those were like the first 4 songs. I sang the demos, and then we started to look for other people to join us in this new band that didn't even have a name at that time.
Is this in 1990?
Yeah, I think that was 1990. Probably midway through 1990.
So you and Danny, you decided to do something completely different from Heavy Rain, and then you wrote these 4 awesome songs. So, and then you were singing at the time
on the demos.
Yeah, I would write the lyrics and sing on the demos, just sort of as a placeholder until we got we got a bona fide vocalist, to join us. And we looked around, and we called up some people that we knew on in the scene, and eventually we got Billy Milano to sing. And Billy was a good friend of ours from the early days, in early 80s CBGB's scene. And he actually expressed his interest before that in singing for the Crumbsuckers. So we had an old history together, and sort of a willingness to start a project together. And so Billy started to sing with what eventually became Propane in 1990. And so he would drive out from New Jersey to Long Island, and we would rehearse a few days a week. And that's how it all started. We had different guitar players. It seemed like we were switching guitar players every 6 months. Chuck Lenahan from the Crumbsuckers was one of our guitar players. We had a guy from Chicago named Eric Bauman as another guitar player. One period in time in the early days, there was a guy named Alan Zaleski who played guitar for us for a while. We were just trying to figure it out, and sort of change things up until we felt really comfortable.
So you wrote these 4 songs, and you tried Billy for a while, but you didn't have a guitar player at the time. But did you continue to write more songs?
We continued writing songs after Billy joined the band, but I was still writing all of the lyrics and probably 95% of the music at the time. And I think everybody else was pretty comfortable in me writing the stuff, and it seemed to be going pretty well. And again, this is like the early stage of the development of a brand new band, so anything can happen. Just when you think you have a solid lineup, you discover that things can fall apart pretty easily.
But did you feel early on that you were on to something really good? Did you feel that good feeling in your stomach that this is something to build on?
Yeah, I knew that we were on to something really good. The people that heard the material around, that were in our circle and around our circle at that time felt the same way. We eventually brought some demos to John Zazula at Megaforce Records. That he totally endorsed the project and eventually signed the project. And so when we went into the studio to record Foul Taste of Freedom, that was a Megaforce project and financed by Megaforce Records. And so Billy was with us, and Chuck Lenahan was with us. And we rehearsed a lot up around the Ithaca, New York area before actually stepping into the studio. So we were up there for several weeks, just really getting ready to record a great album. And then we got into the recording process. Everything was cool. We recorded all the music. Everything great. And when it came to the vocals, we hit some hurdles, that we eventually couldn't really get over. Billy had a lot of apprehension and I think it was affecting his mental status at the time, which sort of trickled down into affecting his vocal. And we said, why don't we take a break, man? It's just not happening. And we'll take a week or two off and we'll go back home. Everybody chill out and we'll come back to the studio and we'll try it again. And we unfortunately ran into the same stuff.
So you knew you had to change vocalist.
Yeah. We all knew, that it just wasn't working. And that was a difficult realization, when you put so much time and energy and money, in the case of Megaforce, into this project, and it's just not turning out the way that it should. And everyone knew it. So then, what do we do at the time? At that time, what do we just say? Fuck it, or do we try to salvage this recording? And I said, well, I sang on all the demos, so let me give it a shot. I'll try to sing the stuff in the studio. And I didn't want to create a situation where I couldn't play and sing the stuff at the same time. So we went back into the rehearsal room so that I can get comfortable playing and singing the stuff. So that we knew ahead of time, if it works and we deliver a great record, that it can be done live. So we became a three-piece band, and there was a guy that was working at the studio at the time named Tom Klimchuk, sort of assisting in the project. And when things didn't work out with Chuck Lenihan, which was unfortunate, Chuck is a great guy and a really, really awesome guitar player. And the number one guy in Crumbsuckers, But for Propane, it's a bit of a different animal, It just didn't work, for a multitude of reasons. And then after things didn't work with Chuck, Tom Klimchuk stepped up to the plate. He said, "Hey, man, I play guitar and I like all the stuff that I'm hearing. Can I give it a shot?" And I said, "Sure." He tried it out and he passed with flying colors, as they say, and the rest is history. And so when it comes to Foul Taste of Freedom, he actually did the rhythm track to the song Foul Taste of Freedom. So that was Tom's debut. All of the rhythm guitars on that record, with the exception of Foul Taste of Freedom, I did all the rhythm guitars.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And also on The Truth Hurts, it's something that's not very known, in the Propane circles, because I didn't give myself credit on the records because, it just wouldn't look right.
It's cool to know the history behind the records, what's actually happening.
After The Truth Hurts, when we had the Contents Under Pressure lineup, we all kind of agreed, like, who's ever playing the rhythms the best at the time, that's the guy that should be recording the stuff on the record. And for Contents Under Pressure, it was sort of a mixture between myself doing the rhythms and Rob Machete.
Let's go back to the release of the Foul Taste of Freedom. I still remember to this day when I bought the album, and when I put on Foul Taste of Freedom, it sounded like totally different from everything I ever heard. It still had the aggression, it had the energy.
Well, I think it's one of those records where, in the end, despite all of the hardship, putting things together and trying to find our way, as a brand new band, things eventually fell into place. They fell into place in a really cool, interesting way. And the production still holds up, I think, to this day.
Yeah.
If you put on Foul Taste of Freedom, it still sounds as fresh as it did, when it first came out. And it's turned into a real classic for us, in the way that really great debut albums should.
Did you attract both the old hardcore fans and the metalheads, or how was it received?
It was received really, really well from all different kinds of audiences. People that were into just the hard rock to people that were into hardcore, and a lot of metalheads. So we started with a very diverse audience, and we still have a very diverse audience. It was just when when the Truth Hurts album came out, that's when, you know, a lot of people were puzzled, you know, because it's sort of that Life of Dreams to Beast on My Back thing. So it's different. It's definitely a contrast between the first two albums. You know?
And this album was released in the middle of when the grunge had exploded.
Right.
Nevermind was released in 91. 10 by Pearl Jam was released in 91. So it was a pretty tough time to release an album that was so different from what was the flavor of the day, so to speak.
Yeah, that's true. You know, hardcore was in a bit of a transitionary period at the time, and it didn't start to see a resurgence again until probably at least a couple of years later. You know, primarily in Europe. You know, when bands like Biohazard and Dog Eat Dog, and you know, later, a little bit later on, Propane and Sick of It All, it got some broader acceptance, you know, in terms of a big wider scene is concerned. And yeah, during the grunge years, it was sort of, you know, we were playing this sort of music that was really went back into the underground again. And we were a little bit influenced by that too. I mean, you know, we were wearing our flannels and stuff.
Yeah, I remember that from the early pictures.
yeah. And I mean, that was really cool music to us at that time too, because we could identify with it. These were just like regular people playing the music that they really enjoyed, and they represented themselves in such a way. It had a bit of a blue collar vibe to it, and so we could definitely identify with that. You know, it wasn't like we were opposed to grunge or anything. I had my share of grunge albums.
When I look back at your discography, you have released 15 studio albums, 1 cover album, Run for Cover, 2 best of albums, 1 live album called Road Rage, 1 compilation of live and studio songs called 20 Years of Hardcore. Wow, that's an impressive catalog. And if you have to pick 3 albums that will be your personal favorites, can you? I think that's a hard task, but if you would try to do that, which albums would that be?
Well, Foul Taste of Freedom, you know, for obvious reasons, the debut, and as I said earlier, you know, it really withstood the test of time very well. Act of God, because you know, it really made a mark for the band in terms of us becoming more independent and not being so reliant on other forces to produce records and stuff like that. It was entirely self-produced. I think the production really holds up to this day. It's a really strong record with some really great, catchy, memorable Propane songs on there. And then in terms of sort of the new era of Propane, I think Straight to the Dome set the new, you know, that new style for us in motion. And it's also really strong production from V.O. Pulver, one of the albums that we recorded in Switzerland. And yeah, when I could, you know, I could still listen to that album today and get the same feeling as I did, you know, at the end of the studio session.
I got all your records on CD, and I often listen to them in the car. And I listened to just Straight to the Dome album, and that's from the first song to the last song. It's got a special energy. It's got a rawness. It's very direct.
Yeah, and the lyrics, you know, I guess that's why we call the album Straight to the Dome. You know, the lyrics were just a punch to the head. You know. And I listened to some of those tracks, and I'm like, man, I don't know where I got a lot of that stuff from. Like Bitter, you know, the song Bitter Pill. And
far in the sky, take me home, let me lie in my own free will. When I take this pill now,
it sucks to be you.
Wow, it sucks to be you. Yeah, to me that's the
I hope that with the new record that I can recapture some of that real intense spirit, and flame behind the lyrics. That's yet to be seen. But musically, with the new stuff, it's definitely there.
So you have Straight to the Dome as a kind of a model for your new album, in a way. Is that fair to say that?
Oh, in some ways, yeah. I want to capture the adrenaline and the rawness from that album. It's a good template in terms of an overall spirit. Sure.
Going back to Run for Cover, the cover album, it's got everything from Sepultura to Slayer, and it's got Discharge, of course, and Negative Approach. And I was reading the liner notes the other day where you explained your history with the band, and it was really interesting to see I thought you bought your first 7 with Negative Approach in '83, and that seems to start off your love for hardcore in a way, if I understand you correctly by reading the liner notes. Is that fair to say that?
Yeah, a lot of those bands that we represented on Run for Cover, they meant something more to us than just that we were fans of the song. So with music, they really meant something more. And like, for example, Negative Approach. One of my earliest, one of the earliest 7-inches that I bought. Saw them a couple of times way back in the day. Always great. I was always a big fan of the vocals, in the band. And when I saw this band called Crackdown on Long Island, in the really early '80s, they might have even been supporting Crumbsuckers at the time. And I saw the vocalist, who was Chris Notaro, and I said, "Wow, this he sounds like John Brannon," and then all of a sudden they covered Nothing by Negative Approach. I said, "Wow, it sounds just like the original version," When we began to look for vocalists after the departure of Dave Brady, the first guy that we called was Chris Notaro, So again, when it comes to Run for Cover, a lot of these songs mean something really special to us, and also like with Agnostic Front, it goes beyond the music. It's this old friendship, and with Roger helping us get our first gig in New York City, and so on and so forth.
So it's a really cool history behind each song. I mean, you wrote about GBH, Motorhead. You can tell that these are important influences for you.
Yeah, exactly. I think, the stories behind our reasoning for covering those songs are just as important as the covers themselves.
And the chance for a Run for Cover 2?
I've heard it requested a lot, from fans. I think it would definitely be a fun project to do. And just like remixing Beast on My Back, it would definitely be a labor of love if it ever takes place, because if I were to propose that to a label, they would probably say, "No, it's not in the budget, so to speak." But knowing that, it's not something that I would be against.
Many of you old, by saying old, I mean that you've been around a long time, like Agnostic Front and Chromax, and many bands are still active today. That's pretty cool, actually, 30 years later, 40 years later.
Yeah, it really amazes me, because way back then, I don't think any of us could have predicted that it would last even a few years, because real life takes over. That's the main reason why we've had so many lineup changes over the years. It doesn't have to do with any kind of problems that people have with each other or strife, they need more out of life than just being in a band. For some of it, so for some of us, we've decided to dedicate a lot of ourselves into our band and into music. But I can't speak for everyone, and so some of us stick it out, and we still enjoy what we do, and others, they go on to still play their instruments, maybe as a hobby, and they're content and successful doing other things, which is perfectly fine.
And I guess it's a lifestyle not only for you as a member of the band, but also for the family, that you will go on tour for, let's say, 3 months. It takes a special commitment from the members and the families to make that work, I guess.
Yeah, and it never gets easier because there are always a few doors closing around you, and then you have to kind of figure out the best way forward. So you have to navigate, and you have to be responsible to the people that are on board with you, and sometimes they have broader requirements than you could ever meet, and then you might run into another lineup change. You just never know. And everybody's always quick to pounce on the band that has a lineup change. Oh man, what's going on over there? Well, if you're on this side of the fence, you'd probably understand.
Life is what life is.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the great things that this band takes great pride in is the fact that we all still get along. Everybody, it's like a family in Propane. We're all in touch with each other. I can't say 100%, but most of the members are in touch with each other. On a weekly basis, I talk to Dave Shivari, I talk to JC Dwyer, I talk to Rob Machete, I talk to Rich Frianek through email, occasionally Tom through email.
Speaking about Tom, I know that he was with Propane for many years.
He seems to be okay now. I mean, he has Crohn's disease, so it's not something that goes into complete regression. So he's always dealing with that. And that's something that has these flare-ups that it's very hard to deal with as a touring musician. And that's the main, or that's the sole reason that forced him, that he had to leave the band back in the early 90s. And I always kept the spot open for him. I said, man, if you ever want to come back, just let me know. And so he came back prior to releasing Contents Under Pressure, stayed in the band until, I believe, 2011. And it was sort of the same thing all over again, but worse. His health was really deteriorating. And he was on some pretty heavy medication in the last European tour that we did together. And his ankles were swelling. He had to keep them elevated in the dressing room. And he needed surgery. And it gets to a point where you just have to get together and say, we probably shouldn't keep doing this because if something happens, I don't want to be responsible for that. And I think Tom, as a family guy, doesn't want to take that responsibility either by going out on the road and risking himself.
No, it's not worth it, of course.
Right.
Normally, you release an album between 1 or 2 years between the albums. Now it's been 6 years since your last release, Voice of Rebellion.
Right.
So let's talk about Propane today. Are you in progress of a new record? Touring plans? How are Propane today?
Everything's good. We're working on a lot of different things at the moment. We kind of set a deadline for ourselves to finish up the writing process by the end of August for the new album. I don't know whether that's going to happen, but if it doesn't, it will most certainly be completed in September. And we want to release an album by the end of this year, I don't know who it's going to be released by. You know, that's a thing. So we'll have to find a home for it, and provided that it meets their release schedule, we will be able to release it by the end of the year. But that's what we really want to do. You know, there's been some setbacks along the way between records. You know, I had a major setback in 2017. I was the victim of a robbery and attempted murder in one of the no-go zones in the Brussels area. It was basically a robbery, which eventually turned into a 6-on-1 situation. I was hospitalized with several skull fractures. I needed multiple blood transfusions and things like that. So after that, it was really hard to get back in the game and to meet a level of performance that is in line with everyone's expectations. You know, that took some time to just be able to deliver the songs on stage, again, with any level of comfortability. And, you know, I had to sort out a few other things which were going on, you know, in my life at the time, which I felt that I wanted to kind of weed out to focus a little bit more on Propane. And, you know, I was with a band called Dark House for a while, which for some reason I just didn't have the heart for it anymore. Rather than just continuing and, you know, beating the same drum and sort of expecting some different results. And, you know, I felt that it was time to stop that and to focus and divert more of my energy back into Propane. Where I'm completely comfortable, you know, and that's what I did. But you know, it takes time to transition, you know, and transition your mind into certain areas, and you know, now I'm at the point where I'm comfortable writing again, and I feel like I can deliver something worthwhile, you know. I don't want to just, you know, just because you can sometimes doesn't mean you should. I probably could have released something a couple of years back, but if I don't have it in my heart, I don't want to do it. You can write a record, right? I mean, those of us that have a certain amount of experience, but is it going to be something great? You know, and if it's going to be something great, you have to have it in your heart to write those lyrics that really grab people and to make them say, yeah, you know, that's it. I feel this. So, you know, you have to feel it yourself, and then hopefully people will be drawn to that. But if you're not feeling it, nobody else is going to feel it. And so there within lies the dilemma of the past few years. But the good news is that it's going to happen fairly soon. And when it does, it's going to be great.
There's a lot of people waiting for, longing for a new Propane record. So this is great news.
Yeah, we don't want the fans to get too old, you know.
No. But you get younger ones as well. We are the old ones, but there's another generation taking over as well.
Well, I have a great makeup artist. What can I say? And
the songs ready? Can you tell us an album title or a song title, or how long in the process are you?
Well, I'm taking a little bit of a different approach to the arrangement process. So it's an odd process, but I think it's going to be for the better of the record. You know, in former times, it would be a matter of writing and arranging the music first, and then sort of tailoring the phrasing and the song titles and all of the hooks to that finished piece of music. You know, whereas this time I'm working with an extensive list of, you know, potential titles, and then focusing on writing the choruses first.
Okay, you never tried that before.
Only with Dark House, you know. and this doesn't mean that we're going in a different style of music. I think the most important thing are the hooks. And so if you already wrote a broader piece of music where you're trying to create a hook in this one particular riff somewhere, maybe it's a better theory to just focus on, I like this one title, and let's try to make a really good chorus or a good hook here, and then I could build the song around that. So that's sort of my new theory, and it's working well so far. So I have some choruses, some titles that I don't want to give away, and I think that the rest of the songs, the verses come along much easier once you have that inspirational hook in mind, and that song title which inspires the lyrics, which will come soon after.
It sounds like there's less limitations with that approach.
Yeah, exactly. It's almost like a musician that uses too many effects.
Yeah,
to achieve the same thing in the end. And I think that the hooks, the choruses are going to be real cool, and in the final product, you'll probably understand, or the listeners and viewers will understand more of my new theory and sort of taking a different approach to the writing process. If we can finish up the writing by the end of August, then we can start recording in September. If it takes an extra month for the writing, then we'll certainly be in the studio in October. Theoretically, we'd be able to release something in December, because there needs to be a little bit of lead up time with press and all of these other things. So in the meantime, we need to find a competent home in terms of a record label. And it's not something that I haven't actively pursued a new label yet. I have some interest, but I'm more focused on the writing now. And once things really start taking shape, when I'm in lyrical mode, then I think I could really explore certain record company avenues and see, if we can strike a deal with somebody, and then work on a release schedule and that type of thing. And that'll really start getting the ball rolling in terms of release and tour opportunities and shows and that type of thing. After, I can't say after, but during the whole COVID thing, it's been real difficult to try to commit to concerts, because every time that we did, we eventually had to cancel, unfortunately.
You had a full US tour planned that you have to cancel.
Yeah. Now that was a big blow to the band, and it was a huge financial blow because there was so much invested. And after the first show, everything just went south. And so we played one show out of 30 some odd gigs.
Where was that last show played? When was that? What date was that?
Oddly enough, it was March 13th, Friday the 13th, in Amityville.
Really?
Yeah. So you think of the Amityville Horror.
Yeah.
That was the Propane Amityville Horror.
Speaking of Propane touring, I've seen you twice in Sweden. 2004, you played in a town called Sölvesborg at a place called Kartago, which is a small house, more or less, out in the woods. It seemed like you played in my living room. It was a really great, intimate show.
It felt like playing it in a living room, but it was a pretty cool place, actually. It was
cool.
Really interesting. Yeah, just like a chalet or something. So really intimate place, but it was cool.
It was really cool. And you gave 100%, and you had the Connell Forge on the guest spot.
Yeah, really cool band, great guys. We have some really cool memories with those guys. They were great.
And then I saw you in 2008 in my old hometown, Gothenburg. And then you haven't been in Sweden since then. Now when you hopefully release the album this year, and I guess you will plan a big tour, hopefully in Europe. Can we expect you in Scandinavia?
I hope so, provided that we haven't been there in so long. I think we'll have some good opportunities to go back. at least for a couple of shows in Denmark and one or two shows in Sweden. Maybe in Norway too, because we've had some successful shows there in the past. So I would love to go back, man. So it's something that we're certainly going to talk about with our booking agent. When we get things rolling again in terms of live performances and tours. Yeah, but we'll definitely try to come back. It's always something that we have in the back of our mind, and especially to maybe come and play Sweden rock, which would be awesome, because I think we'd make a lot of new fans over there that way. And I think our agent has tried to get us on the Sweden rock a couple of times. And I think, I don't think it's that easy, unless you're a band that's pretty big in the region over there.
I have some fans question for you. Here we go. The first question is from Frank, and he wants to know what did Sundance mean to you?
Well, Sundance was a great rock club in the 80s and 90s on Long Island. And it eventually became one of the, I think it was the primary home of the Crumbsuckers on Long Island, and the owner of the club was a great guy named Frank Cariola. And he did a lot of really great things for the Long Island scene back in the day. He booked all kinds of music in the club, so it wasn't just like a punk and hardcore venue. So, one night he would have there would be maybe Zebra playing or Blue Oyster Cult. And the next night there would be Crumbsuckers, and then maybe Molly Hatchet the next night. And a really, really cool place. It was a fairly large place for us to play in those times, because it was, I think, 1,200 capacity in the room. And we were very proud to have gotten to the point where we were actually selling the place out, in the mid to late 80s.
What happened to that club? Is it still active?
No, it's not. It hasn't been active since those days. Frank moved to another venue and called it the Roxy, which is also pretty much a legendary club. I think he tried to open up a Sundance 2 or something like that later on. I don't think it lasted very long for one reason or another. And I don't know what happened to the original place. Maybe they just lost their lease or something like that. I'm not 100% sure.
But it was at Sundance you played your first reunion show with the Crumbsuckers in 1990.
Yeah, it was great.
His name is Cohen. He wants to know, how do you maintain this distinct, unmistakable propane sound?
Well, I think to establish a particular sound, you do that through a certain amount of repetition, and so there's a particular vocal sound that runs through the core of the band, through all the years, and that's a bit unmistakable. So it's the same style. Sometimes we turn up the heaviness a little bit, and sometimes back off on certain songs. But essentially, if you hear propane, it's propane, and we have a certain groove and a certain style of music, that we've been doing since the start. And there are other examples of that, like AC/DC and the Ramones and bands that stood. Yeah, Motorhead. They never shied away from the style that they created, and they just give different variations of it. But in the end, it's still them, and and so we kind of subscribe to that. And a lot of the media sometimes and the press has kind of shunned us because of that. But if you want experimental music, then you should go to prog music or something like that. I think hardcore fans, and fans of extreme metal, they want a fair amount of repetition, and these are the elements in the band that I like, so I expect them to at least have some of those further down the line, and so that's what we do. the one time where we deviated from the norm a little bit would be on No End in Sight, where things vocally got a little bit more melodic, and some diehard Propane fans weren't expecting that, and so we got a little bit of a flack for that. And but I think at that time we really needed it in order to move ahead eventually. And you know, I thought after that release, there were a couple of ways to go. You know, we could embellish on that, or we can back off. You know, and we decided to back off, and I eventually started Dark House. You know, for my melodic needs, and you know, to write things in a melodic nature, and so that gave me that creative outlet to write melodic music, and it allowed Propane to go back to doing what we do best, which is just the straight up heavy stuff.
Eugene, Gino, I'm not sure about this, Lahovin, he wants to know what's your favorite beer, and then he says, and I heard you met Vice President Al Gore in 95, 96 while touring. What was your experience?
Well, favorite beer? Well, my go-to beer, is the one I usually drink at home, would be this one right here, which is from Sweetwater Brewing, which is from Atlanta, Georgia. And they make a beer called G13 IPA. And it's a real dank beer. I don't know if you're a big beer fan, but it's made with terpenes, which is sort of like a hemp marijuana vibe. Okay. So it's very unique. It's not for everybody, but I really enjoy it. And ironically, I'm not a smoker, but I like beer that tastes like marijuana. Yeah. What was the second half of Gino's question?
He said, and I heard you met Vice President Al Gore in 95, 96 while touring. What was your experience?
Well, yeah. Well, Gino Lahoen, the guy asking the question, he's actually one of our old drum technicians. And so it's sort of an inside joke, because we used to call him Vice President Al Gore back in the day, because he has similar facial features to Al Gore back in his vice presidential days. Yeah, and the one meeting that he's talking about comes from a show that we did I believe it was in Chicago, and there was some illegal substances going around at the hotel, one of which Eugene or Gino partook in. And so he was at the hotel bar kind of hanging out and tripping out. And I was in the lobby, and I saw that he was hanging out in the bar. And these are the days when, you know, there might have been like a payphone. And so I called the hotel bar. First, I called the reception. And then I said, hey, there's a guy at the bar, and he's a friend of mine. Can you put me on with the bartenders? Oh, yeah, okay. So the bartender picks up, and I say, hey, there's a guy in front of you. I don't know if he was wearing a Propane hat, but he had a hat a baseball cap. And I said, he's wearing a baseball cap. And can you tell him, refer to him as Vice President Gore, and say, hey, Vice President Gore. And if he acknowledges, just say that the president is on the phone and he'd like to speak to you. And that's exactly what happened. And I don't know. I think he probably still has mental scars from that to this day.
That's a real funny story. There's someone called Daryl who wants to know what is the biggest difference in the metal scene overseas compared to America? And where would you like to see the metal scene in America go?
Well, I think the scene it has more similarities than differences. You know, when I compare the two different scenes, the biggest difference is I think the metal and hardcore scene is about the same size in Europe as it is in the United States. It's just that we have this incredible landmass in North America, so if you take the same amount of people or fans and you spread them out in North America, the scene is going to appear to be smaller. So generally speaking, most places that you go, the shows are going to be a little bit smaller than in Europe, with the exception of the bigger cities, of course, where the population is higher. But the enthusiasm is the same. We have great fans everywhere in the world. And in terms of record sales, I think we're pretty much 50-50 over the years in terms of our record sales in Europe versus North America. So it's a bit of a misconception,
Great. And then we have the last question from a Richard Duncan. He wants to know if we know some place that might be suitable for you guys to play. How would we recommend it?
Well, if any one of the viewers or listeners knows of a good club in their area where they would like to see us play, any cool underground club, metal club, hardcore club, just write to our website at propane.com or get in touch with us on Facebook or the Facebook group, Propane Army. We're always listening. We're always, just a click away, as they say. And we generally get back to people pretty quickly, and we can, put something together if it's possible.
Good advice. Gary, thank you very, very much for doing this interview, and I'm really honored to have the chance to speak to you. And I'm looking forward to the new Propane album, to your tour, and to hopefully be at one of your shows shortly.
Absolutely. As I said earlier, when it comes to playing Scandinavia and in Sweden, that's going to be of the first on the agenda when we put together a new tour. We'll try to come back that way and play some shows again. That's the main thing, is just to get out and play some shows again in general, and then we can just add to the list, and hopefully things will be back to normal regarding a normal touring schedule in the upcoming weeks or months. And thanks again for the interview. Thanks for everything you do with the Propane Army. It's all the guys really appreciate it. And we hope to see you sometime. Won't be this year. We got a lot to do with the new record, but next year we hope to come your way.
Yeah, and say hello to the rest of the Propane guys and Lisa, of course. And thanks again, Gary. And we get in touch when your record is released so we can talk about that.
Okay, will do. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Gary.
Take care.
See you,
Bye-bye.
man.